Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I am Sean. Today I'm going to be reviewing A Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin? I don't know how to pronounce her name. I never know how to pronounce anything. This is a book on the top 1000 list by James Mustich, 1,000 books to read before you die. I picked it up from the library a couple years ago, but I only read about 20 pages. I am not a fan of fantasy, really. And my recollection of it was just okay. But it wasn't like bad enough where I wanted to DNF it or anything, so I just, had to return it to the library. And I've gone back to pick it up several times, but I think it's been checked out. It's like a very high in demand book. So eventually I was at another bookstore in another town, and I saw this book there, so I was like, well, I'm tired of always going to the library and trying to see if it's in or not. So I just went ahead and bought a copy, and I've had it for about a year or so, and I finally gave it a try. And I do have to say, over the course of about a week and a half or 2 weeks, I read the whole book. I did pick up basically where I left off. I was like 20 pages in, and what I remembered was this like young wizard was on a boat getting taken to an island where he could like begin his wizardry training. And so I didn't want to like start the book over again, even though I didn't remember anything about who the characters were. I just began like 20 pages in where they were on the boat heading to the island and read it all of the book within the last week or two. Oh, I should put my signed book by Ursula K. Le Guin up here. Dancing at the Edge of the World. It's inscribed. For Mary Jane, our dear neighbor. Wow. With warmest good wishes and at Christmas. Ursula, 1992. I've talked with a bookstore owner quite a bit about like whether inscribed books are more or less valuable. And what he kind of thinks is that generally he thinks they are, even though if it's like just to some generic person, just like to Mary, because it shows some kind of a personal connection with the author. But if it's actually inscribed to someone who is like connected to the author, like in this case, our dear neighbor, that makes it almost more valuable because it establishes like an actual personal relationship with the author, whether it's their neighbor or their literary agent or their like kindergarten teacher, whatever. It just adds a personal connection to the author. So yeah, I don't think I've ever actually read this like inscription before. So yeah, I didn't know that it was inscribed to Ursula K. Le Guin's neighbor. A part of me also wonders like if the author would be upset, like if they find out like, oh man, I signed that book for Mary and she must have sold it to someone or whatever. Like, why did Mary get rid of it? I gave that to her. So now the author knows who to blame. I think she's actually still alive, Ursula K. Le Guin. I'll look it up. No, I think she died in 2018. So unless she comes back as a zombie, you're safe, Mary. Put this up there. I didn't know Ursula K. Le Guin, whatever, was dead. I thought she was still alive. Okay, so first as non-spoilery as I can. So this book, Earthsea, is about this wizard named, I don't know how to pronounce it exactly, but I think it's Ged, G-E-D. And he is a young boy who has some magical powers, especially like weather-related powers. The wizards in this book have a lot of powers like relating to like pushing wind and stuff for like pushing sails and stuff, because a lot of this world is based around water and islands. So that magical ability is very useful to them, like patching together boats and patching together sails, putting wind in the sails, protecting the boats from the sea. That's kind of like what these wizards largely do, like in their day-to-day lives. Which, first off, I want to say I kind of like that. The Ursula K. Le Guin, I never know how to pronounce her name, that is kind of how she uses the magic in her world. And I think that's very good because it uses the magic in a practical way. So if you think like, okay, if you have magical ability and you live like, on all these islands and stuff where sailing is real common, magic that will help that would be very practical. That would be like your main application for magic would be, protecting all of these sailors. So right off the bat, I think that is a good little bit of world building right there. I think a lot of fantasy writers may not really wholly think things through about their world building. So for instance, if you can use magic to heal, a lot of books, they may do that like very rarely, if like one of the wizards gets injured or whatever, then they'll heal them. But if you have magical ability to heal, why wouldn't that be like your main thing that you do for the world, You could like be doctors for the whole world, But instead, a lot of authors only use that magic to serve like some real limited goal. Like if one of their cast gets hurt, it's like, oh, well, one of our wizards can do magic. Why isn't that wizard who can do that magic working in some kind of a hospital? That would be a very practical place for them to go, a practical use for their power. So this young wizard boy, Ged, or whatever his name is, he, since I don't really remember the first 20 pages, some way or another, well, first there's like a local witch lady who kind of helps teach him some rudimentary spells. And then a wizard comes along, and this wizard is like, hey, I sense that you will be a very powerful wizard. So there's this school on this island. Do you want to go to that? So the guy does. Ged, the young boy, goes to this island where he learns more about being a wizard. He learns his powers. And then basically, I don't think this is a spoiler, but in the first quarter of the book or so, the first half of the book, Ged is very much obsessed with like pride. He is very confident in his abilities, and he's really just not really a very likable person, which I think is fine because the author is establishing like his character kind of before he goes through this like period of character growth or whatever. Ged is a flawed character, and that's great, that's fine. So he's really egotistical, kind of. He's real proud. He's really like, thinks, yeah, I'm going to be a great wizard. I'm going to be the most powerful wizard ever, and I'm so much better than everyone, and I can do everything better than everyone. That's really this guy's attitude. And even though, I didn't really like him because of that, I understood that this is, pretty much a young boy. I forget how old he is, something around like 10 years old or whatever. So that seems like it would be a very common thing for a boy to think. If you're a boy and you've realized like, oh, you could use these spells, you have these powers, every boy I think would feel like this guy does, like, hey, I'm going to be the most powerful wizard ever, I'm going to be the greatest ever, everyone else is worse than me, I'm the best. And it is this pride of Ged that leads him to do something pretty foolish. And again, I don't think this is a spoiler. This is like only something you'd read on the back of the book. He basically unleashes what is called a shadow. Basically this part of this like other world, kind of like the world of death or whatever, the void kind of, it comes into his world, and it's this shadow presence that basically is unleashed on the world, and it is hunting Ged, and basically it seeks to corrupt him and turn him evil, possessing him to become like a dark lord, And that's another thing I liked about this book, is there's not really a dark lord figure. So there's not like a Sauron character from Lord of the Rings where there's a dark lord who has a massive army and he's trying to spread across the world, and only the stable boy character can save the world, It's not that story at all. Instead, it's a story about this real proud young boy who has these powers, and he misuses those powers and unleashes the shadow, which is basically not named, basically. I'm going to talk more about that later. So yeah, it's not like there's a dark lord so much. It's just a shadowy presence. And instead of there being a dark lord, like, you know, that this guy has to do battle with, instead, this shadow is basically threatening to make him a dark lord. And another thing I didn't really touch on yet is that I think part of the inspiration behind this book is that Ursula K. Le Guin, whatever her name is, she was kind of thinking about how a lot of fantasy books like Lord of the Rings, there's Gandalf, and then also like with Merlin from like King Arthur and stuff, you don't really see how these powerful wizards came to be. So this book is kind of like the origin story of the Merlin character or the Gandalf character, where you see that wizard who will be like the most powerful wizard in the world one day. You see how they came to be. That is about it for the completely non-spoiler parts of the book. So I want to talk about a few more things about the book. I don't think they're necessarily spoilers, and if they are, I will warn you guys if you want to skip those. But just talking about the book in more detail. So one thing about the book that is real unique is that the book is pretty notable for having a largely black cast. And it was funny, when I was originally reading this book, I didn't know that. So I just looked up the book online one day to read about it. And I read that the book is notable because like all of the characters in the book are like brown or black. And it was just funny because I was like, they're black? I had no idea. I was just like naturally picturing all of the characters as white. You know, that's just sort of, you know, my natural tendency, whatever. Just imagine the characters are white. That's what I'm used to. And so when I like picked up the book a couple weeks ago to begin reading it again, I was kind of like falling into the same trap because I was just kind of picturing the main character as white, and then he meets a character in the school and I was picturing he was white, and then he meets another character who kind of becomes his best friend, and I was like gonna picture him as white as well. But then there was a line that said, unlike Ged, who had red brown skin, and I was like, oh, so it does say he has red brown skin, you know? I just was kind of thinking at some point maybe the author said the character was dark of skin, and just in my mind I thought dark of skin, okay, so that just means he has a suntan or whatever. But then I actually came across a passage where it says he has red brown skin. Ged does. So I was like, oh, okay, so I guess I need to start picturing him that way. And this other character, like his best friend or whatever, he is described as actually having like black skin. And the other kid in school was also red brown skin. So really all of the characters were described as dark skinned people. So I kind of forced myself to think like, okay, he is red brown skin, this other guy is black, you know? And that was kind of took a little bit of effort to do because I was just so naturally wanting to picture all the characters as white. And I will say that I do love that, because I think that is something that fantasy desperately needs, is to have more diverse casts. Because so often I think a lot of fantasy is just white, European themed, middle-aged themed stories. And I think that is really limiting your potential stories you could tell. And I've said this in other videos, but I think fantasy writers should be inspired more, use inspiration for things across the world. So use like Native American mythology and culture as inspiration, use African culture as inspiration. Look at Asia, look at, you know, China, Japan, look at the Philippines, look at Indonesia, look at the Middle East. You have all of this world to use as inspiration in all of these different time periods. You know, you have the Stone Age and the Bronze Age and the Iron Age and all of that. You have the Age of Gunpowder and everything. And a lot of fantasy writers just stick with like medieval Europe. And that's kind of like, you know, Game of Thrones and also Lord of the Rings, you know, even Harry Potter is Europe, or England specifically. So I really liked that this author had this diverse cast. Or I don't even know if you should say it has a diverse cast, because I think pretty much all of the characters in the book are black. So that's not really diverse. It's just different than all the other fantasy books where everyone is white. There is a moment in the book where light-skinned characters are actually explicitly referred to, and what happens in that scene, and it's a real quick moment, is Ged is on this boat, like sailing across the sea or whatever, and there's a reference to this chain of islands in the northeast where the people of those islands are known to be light of skin and barbaric. And my issue there, at first I was kind of like, I saw what she was doing, because usually in like a lot of these kind of stories, it would be the dark skinned characters who are barbaric, it'd be the other cultures who are barbaric. And since most all of the cast in this book are dark skinned characters, it kind of seems natural that, okay, so the light of skin characters are going to be the barbaric ones instead of the dark skinned characters. So initially, for the first few minutes or whatever, first few hours after I read this, I did not really have as big a problem with that, because I just thought, okay, well, that's flipping it around, instead of the dark-skinned characters being barbaric, it's the light-skinned characters. But the more I thought about it, the more it began to bother me. And this is real difficult to explain, but basically I have this problem with a lot of political feminism, and also like a lot of, I don't know how to say it exactly, but kind of like the black, I don't know how to say it, like black power movement or whatever. Although they talk about, equality and all this stuff and diversity, what they in effect do a lot of times is actually basically support retribution. So they do the same kind of things that they complain about that were done to them. So in this book, mentioning like this land of light-skinned barbarians, like I get that, it's flipping it around, it's reversing it. Instead of the dark-skinned characters being the barbarians, it's the light-skinned characters being the barbarians. But isn't the point supposed to be that it is wrong to like judge a culture like that? Like just thinking, oh, these people who look different than me, these people who have different skin color than me, they are barbarians. If it is wrong for white people to basically brand black people as barbarians, then it's wrong for like the black world or whatever to brand the white people as barbarians. And the reason I mentioned feminism specifically is because the same thing happens with kind of like feminist stories and like girl power stories. For instance, a lot of these people will complain about like movies and stuff, how they have like the scantily clad women and are like, oh, you're objectifying the women, that is bad. But then what do? They turn around and they make movies like the Star Wars Acolyte movie or whatever, where they put a man, like they have a shirtless man or whatever, and they have the women oogle at the men or whatever. And like in the Star Wars movie, the Disney sequel trilogy or whatever, there's a moment where Rey sees Kylo Ren and he's shirtless. These feminists would have a major problem if like Kylo Ren used the Force or whatever to look at Rey and saw that she was only wearing her bra. These people would never allow that. That would be like, oh, that's objectifying her. That's whatever. That's terrible. We'll never do that. We'll never have Kylo look in and see, Rey taking a shower or whatever, or Rey taking a bath. That would be objectifying. But what do? They turn around and do the same thing with the male character, both in the Disney sequel movie, I forget which one it is, with Kylo Ren being shirtless, and then in the Acolyte they do it again when the guy is like in a lake or something taking a bath, and I think he's naked or whatever. So it is basically the hypocrisy of what these groups are claiming to oppose. So like claiming to oppose like presenting blacks or whatever as barbarians, and so what does she do? She presents, oh, the white characters, the light-skinned characters, they are the barbarians. This was a very brief scene, and that was like the only part of the line where it just said like, this other island chain or whatever is supposed to be inhabited by light-skinned people who are known to be barbarians. The next book in the series actually, I think, takes place on those islands. So I would be very interested to see exactly how the author presents it from there, because basically I think the way the author could redeem that statement is basically if Ged goes to that island and he discovers that those light-skinned people are actually not that barbaric, you know? That he is just not used to those people because he just doesn't see a lot of those light-skinned people because they're not common where he is from. And so he had like prejudices against them that were not well founded. I wonder if the author will do that, or if instead she will actually have them be barbaric people. If she does it that way, I think the series would probably like switch to an immediate like 1 star for me, because again, it's doing the exact thing that these people claim to oppose, like viewing other cultures as barbaric or whatever. So I just want to make that distinction clear. I think a lot of people who try to claim to push diversity really do not. What they push is retribution. They think, oh, well, this was done to me in the past, so now once I get power, I'm going to do the same thing to others. I would like to talk more about this, but I can't really find the words to, and it's really not supposed to be the point. I should get back to the review. In terms of the actual like writing and storytelling and all that, this is difficult. The first half of the book I liked pretty well, I guess. Things were going by very quickly. So for instance, when Ged arrives in the school, you don't really see very much him going to any of his classes or whatever. You don't really meet any of his teachers. So this is not like in any way Harry Potter, where, you know, you get to the wizard school and you go through all the school or whatever. The author really just flies by it. Within 1 paragraph, it'll just say like, for the rest of the year, Ged practiced the magic or whatever, and he got really good or whatever. So like an entire year passes in just a paragraph or whatever. You do not actually see him taking his courses, so you don't really see how he becomes better. He just does. I didn't really have a problem with that because I just kind of understood like, okay, that's not going to be the focus of this book. This book is not Harry Potter. It's not just about the school, you know, there's something else the author wants to get to. So it's kind of just skipping past these bits that are not really super important. But in terms of world building, I think it is ultimately a knock on the book. And it kind of compounds with the rest of the book basically, because throughout the book really I can't really say there are any really well developed characters. There's kind of the main character Ged, who his personality, you know, he has that personality trait at the start of the book where he's really proud. He's really cocky about his abilities, and then he kind of has a moment where he has to grow up and mature and face that. And I think he does that very well, and that's presented pretty well in the book. It does come a little bit too easily maybe, where he's really proud and then this shadow enters the book, and from that moment on he, you know, kind of changes pretty abruptly. It was a very sudden change, but I would kind of grant it. I don't think it was a really bad change or really poorly done. It wasn't really a problem for me, but it could be a problem for other readers where it's just too sudden a character growth change. But I kind of touched on the characterization and stuff. Except for Ged, I don't really feel the characters in the book are very well fleshed out. And really, when I think about it, I don't think the world is really too fleshed out. So I mean, like, I don't really feel like the school was fleshed out, not the teachers. There's also a headmaster in the school who I think you literally meet for like 2 scenes, where basically he would have probably in all like 2 paragraphs is all he appears in the book, and that is basically your Dumbledore character. Like 2 paragraphs and that's it. For his other classmates, really I think only 2 of them are mentioned. There's like one who is his best friend, and then there's another who is like kind of his antagonist in a way, his rival. And these characters are not done too well either. In fact, one of them, kind of the antagonist character, once there's this kind of moment where this antagonist character kind of goads Ged into doing this stupid thing he does. In fact, I don't really want to say he goads him into it, because it's more Ged is the one instigating it. After that moment, that character really does not appear at all in the rest of the book. There's one real brief reference to him, but yeah, I mean, basically that's it for him in the book. He's done. The wizard character who shows up in the start of the book to like recommend to Ged go to this island to receive his training or whatever. In the book, it's kind of tried to express how that guy is like a very mentor figure for Ged. But in all, he probably knows him for I don't know how long, just like a day or whatever. That's like all Ged knows that guy for. And supposedly he's supposed to be almost like close to a father figure for him. And he's just not. You really don't see these characters together very much at all. So in terms of like characterization and world building, and also like I want to mention like all these different islands, there's a whole ton of them, but you don't really feel, I think, like you get to know the world building behind this world. This book has nothing on Tolkien when it comes to world building. Tolkien has like, in order to explain the history of any kind of random place, Tolkien would have to go back like thousands of years, and he would have like a whole genealogy of all these kings and stuff and all these elves who first came to this land and how this land came into being and what civilization was on that land for like the last 2,000 years or whatever. Tolkien, his world is really fleshed out. Same thing with George R. R. Martin, Game of Thrones, where every land has just, 100 characters or whatever for each family who is from that land. With this book, it's not that way at all. So it's just like there may be one character who is mentioned and you don't really know anything about that character. You don't know who they are, where they come from. You don't know anything about the island they're from, or when you go to a different island, you don't know the history of that island or the history of that island's people or who rules that island or nothing really. You don't know how that island relates with another island, like their history or whatever. Are these other islands are at war? Or are they at peace? Are they allied with each other? Are all these islands under like one king, or are they each ruled independently? There's really no world building too much in this book. I think a lot of people would compare the book to, Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter and maybe Game of Thrones, but the world building in this book is nothing whatsoever to compare to those things. The only thing I think A Wizard of Earthsea has over all of those books or whatever is the more black, dark-skinned cast, which I do like. I do like that a fantasy author is finally having dark-skinned characters and like other cultures and stuff. But you actually get so preciously little about any kind of actual culture. So like the island Ged is from, I do not know anything really about that culture. And all of these cultures kind of seem the same because they're all like on islands. So they all have like boating stuff, sailing stuff. That's what a lot of the culture seems to be. And it's just not really richly detailed. Then, in terms of the writing itself, Ursula K. Le Guin's, whatever, her actual prose, her writing, I think it's passable. I don't think it's really standout good. I don't think it's definitely not standout good. So it's nothing I would point to as like, ooh, this is great, fabulous writing. I think all in all, it's pretty just average writing. I am glad that it doesn't get bogged down into too many details. That is kind of a problem I had with Tolkien, is Tolkien is very much just like, green sunlight sprinkled through green leaves, and the characters traveled south across the river of Ugalbu and then into the forest of Kawa, into what was once the kingdom of Naga. And there they had lunch and they sang a song. Tolkien just gets really tedious with all of his world building and all of his like environmental setting or whatever. Just talking about like the sun and the trees and the leaves and the dirt and the grass. and the streams and the flowers and the animals and whatever. The description in this book is not anywhere close to that bad. So in terms of writing, I think it's pretty passable. So it's not really good. It's not really bad. But at the same time, I will say it is readable because I read the whole thing in about 2 weeks or so. Where I do want to give the book high marks is especially, like I mentioned about the character Ged and his pride or whatever. He's really egotistical and he's really sure about his abilities, and he's really not a very wise guy. He's pretty foolish. I did not like him at the start, of course, but once he had that transformation where he unleashes this shadow and has his character growth, at that moment I really liked his character growth. And something I really liked as well is that basically when he unleashes this shadow, he did something for the wrong reasons. He does some magic for the wrong reasons, for selfish reasons, because he wants to get back at his rival, this other kid in the school. What he does next after he has his character growth or whatever, he makes another mistake where this boy is dying, but while he uses magic in a way he should not, at that moment he uses magic for the right reasons. He's trying to save this boy. Instead of doing magic for the wrong reasons to harm his rival or whatever, now he's making a mistake still, but for the right reasons. I really liked that from a writing or storytelling or character perspective or whatever, where in the start of the book he's making all these mistakes and for the wrong reasons. But then after his character growth moment, he still makes mistakes. But this time he's making mistakes for the right reasons, for good reasons, for noble reasons. And I kind of really liked that, just because I think there's this idea that once you have when you're dealing with a flawed character or whatever, you have to try to make them too good, too perfect, And so what Ursula K. Le Guin, whatever, does in the book is Ged still makes mistakes, but at least this time he's doing it for good reasons. He's doing it for noble reasons. He's trying to do good. He's trying to do the right thing. Whereas in the past, he was doing it for a selfish reason. So I really like that from a character standpoint or whatever. I think that's good writing. Okay, the next thing I want to say is kind of a spoiler. So I don't know exactly if I would call it light or moderate spoilers. I would kind of say more moderate spoilers though. So, and then after this, I kind of want to talk about some more heavy spoilers. So if you don't want to know any more spoilers, I would say go ahead and skip to the next section where I give my final rating for the book, because I kind of want to talk about a few spoilers now. So the next one's going to be a moderate to light spoiler. Okay, so after Ged has his character growth moment or whatever, where he has this shadow come that, is hunting him basically, what he does is he goes to this other island where basically once wizards graduate from the school, they go to a island or whatever where it's kind of like their assignment or whatever, where they're the local wizard, so they kind of take care of the island's problems or whatever. And this island he goes to, there are, I think, 8 or 9 dragons on a nearby island. And it's kind of funny, there's a line where the headmaster mentions he kind of wants to give Ged a low risk assignment, and there just happens to be 8 or 9 dragons nearby. Are you aware of that there's these dragons nearby? I think they are. But I thought that was just kind of funny. This is supposed to be a low risk assignment. And so Ged at this point is fresh out of school. Gosh, I hope I'm saying that name right. People are going to laugh their asses off at me if I'm saying it wrong the whole time. So again, keep in mind, this is right after Ged goes through school and he's, real cocky or whatever, in school. And so at that time, he's still trying to do things the right way. He's still pretty early in his character growth, where as a reader, I'm not sure is he really maturing, or is he kind of just putting all this on, you know? And what he does is he learns some way or another that the shadow is still going to be like pursuing him, because this shadow like wants to corrupt him, you know, and turn him evil. And so he learns that that shadow is kind of probably on his way to get him. And so what he decides is that he staying there on this island presents a danger to the people of that island. But instead of just leaving, which I think would happen in a lot of like fantasy books like this, where the kid is, or the wizard or whatever, is kind of like, hey, I'm endangering you guys here, so I have to go. There are still the dragons around. So what he says is, you know, hey, I'm going to deal with these dragons first for you, but then I have to go. And just that part, I like that from a character standpoint, where he's not like, hey, I have my own problems to deal with, you know? He realizes like, hey, I have to deal with these dragons for you guys. I'll do that, but then I have to go. And this is like his first task after going through this magic school. And he also lost like a year of his studies because he was injured by this shadow. So he's not really as well educated as he could have been, you know? He's still a pretty raw, untested wizard or whatever. And now he says he's going to go up against 8 or 9 dragons. And so he does. So he's on this little raft or whatever, heading toward this island where the dragons are, and he just like summons the dragons. And I thought it was a pretty epic scene where there's just dragons coming at him left and right, and he's just pulling him down into the sea and drowning him and stuff. And I was just like, he has evolved, you know, this guy has some power. This is like a cool scene. He's taking up, he only actually takes on like 5 dragons, you know, not all 8 or 9, but still he takes on like 5 dragons at a time for his like very first mission on his own or whatever, his first quest on his own out of school. So when that happened, I was just like, dude, Ged is a badass. Then, this is also going to be kind of a moderate spoiler. From there, he winds up going to this other island, and there's this, like, princess girl who, you know, he's kind of wounded again. And so this princess girl is, you know, kind of taking care of him. And so as a reader, I'm kind of wondering, is this an ally? This person seems like an ally. And it's like kind of what it reminded me of is like Frodo in Rivendell. And also when he meets Galadriel, you know? So it's like, oh, this is the elf character, the beautiful elf character. They're giving Ged time to rest and recover and, you know, help him on his way. And so you may kind of be thinking that's what this girl is. And what she does is she takes him into like this crypt beneath this castle, and there's a stone at the beneath the castle. And what she says is basically this stone will give him the power he needs to defeat the shadow. And this stone will make him the most powerful wizard to ever live. And so I was just like, is that the way this story is going? Like, is he going to do this? Like, is this how he gets his help? And then he says something like he senses that this stone is evil. And so this princess is like, you know, hey, the only way you could defeat Shadow is with Shadow. And so I was just like, I don't know about that. I think that's a real kind of evil ideology or whatever. You can only defeat evil with evil. And again, moderate spoilers here. Then she also says, like, you know, you'll use this power. The stone has told me you'll use this power and you'll defeat the shadow and you'll be the most powerful wizard in the world and I will rule with you. And that kind of pushes Ged over the line where he knows, no, this is bad. And a line he says that I love is that only light can defeat shadow, only light, or something like that. When he said that, I was like, literally, yes, like out loud, I loved that moment because I was so worried when she said the line about only shadow can defeat shadow, only evil can defeat evil, you know? Ged turns around and says, no, only light can defeat shadow. And so that is just such a yes moment. He is like full light side, you know, he has chosen the good side. There's the dark stone, the evil stone, but he rejects that. He rejects the power. And again, you have to consider Ged's main issue or whatever was his ego, his pride. And so this woman, this lady, is this young girl or whatever, is offering him this stone which says, you know, this will make you powerful. And he rejects that. And he rejects it because it's evil. And he knows only light can defeat evil. And so I was just like, yes, thank you. That is such a good message. So I loved that. And it shows his character growth, rejecting the power because it is dark. He realizes that. So when that line happened in the book, only light can defeat shadow or whatever it is, I thought, okay, that's it. That seals the deal. This is a 5-star book. Now, is it a 5-star book? I'm going to talk about some major spoilers now. So if you do not want to hear that, go ahead and skip to my final rating. Heavy spoilers now. What happens in the rest of the book is Ged basically winds up figuring out that he cannot run from this shadow anymore. He has to pursue it. He has to hunt it down. Which I liked because that's another moment of character growth where instead of running away from the evil, he is pursuing it. Now, a big part of this book is that in this story, knowing something's name or knowing someone's name is very important in the story. Like if you know someone's name, that basically, I don't know how to say it exactly, but that kind of gives you power over that thing. So names are very important in the book. And when the shadow is released, Ged does not know the shadow's name, but the shadow does know his name. And so he's kind of wondering throughout the book, how can I fight this shadow when I do not know its name? And that's like the theme for the whole rest of the book is, you know, what's the name of this shadow? And basically, as soon as like this shadow came out and like latched onto him and said his name, I kind of thought, say your name back. And it keeps going where, you know, Ged is talking later on, you know, about the shadow and he doesn't know the name. And when he meets the dragon is like, I can tell you the shadow's name and all that. And I just kept thinking, say your own name. And so this shadow is trying to possess Ged and turn him evil. And it's hunting him. But he doesn't know the shadow's name. It's supposed to be nameless. So how is he going to figure out his name? And so he encounters a shadow like, I don't know, 3 times or whatever. And he can never overcome it because he doesn't know its name. And so, you know, I'm sure you're onto it already. Eventually, the shadow kind of takes more and more after Ged. So it begins to kind of take Ged's shape. So people like claim to have seen Ged walking around these islands when he wasn't there until like days later. So the shadow is kind of becoming Ged. And I just kept thinking, say your name, try that. Why not? You don't know any other name to try. Try your own name. This shadow is uniquely bonded to you. It came out of the void and you're the first thing it saw and the shadow said your name. Try saying your own name. Why the hell not? You don't know what else to do. And so the whole book, he's just wondering, oh, I don't know the name of this thing. I don't know the name of this thing. It's after me. It's my shadow. It's after me. And it's taking my form. What is this shadow's name? And I just began to think, for the love of God, if he just has to say his own name and that's going to defeat the shadow, I'm going to lose it. And in part, the bigger reason why I like kept thinking, say your own name, dude, is because in the whole book, no one raises that as an idea. It's never a thought. And when the author did that, I kind of knew as a writer, Okay, you're doing that by intent. You don't want to spoil that the shadow is Ged's own name. So the author like completely skips over any possible mention of anyone suggesting, hey, why not just say your name? Or have you ever thought that the shadow could be you? You know, it wants to possess you. And it can say your name. So why not just try saying your own name back? No one mentions that as a possibility. So because of that, I was just like super worried, like, oh my God, if that is like the big twist of the book that he just says his name to defeat the shadow. Please, God, don't have that be the way this book ends. That is so stupid. I mean, I figured that out like as soon as we met the shadow and it came out and it said its name. Ged's name, and Ged didn't know what to say back to it, and the shadow is like trying to bond with him and take his form or whatever, possess him. It's even like taking his shape. I was just, say your name, try it, why not? Why is no one even mentioning that as a possibility? It is so obvious. And so I was just kind of getting pissed off, just thinking like, please, 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 please don't have that be the shadow's name in the end. It's so stupid, it's so easy. It's so predictable. Don't do it. And I was just getting so frustrated because I was so worried. Just like, oh man, the author is not mentioning this at all. No one's raising it as a possibility. Just, dude, say your own name. Why not? You got nothing else to lose. No one mentions it. So just please, no, don't have it be his own name. So he finally confronts a shadow and he says his own name. And then the shadow's defeated and it's dead and the world is saved. That is how the book ends. All he had to do was say his own name. And I knew it as soon as the shadow came out and said Ged. I was like, okay, it's a shadow. What is a shadow? A shadow is whatever it's like casting, you know? So if you cast your own shadow, so your shadow is you, you know? So say your own name. It's so obvious. And, oh God, and it's the final, like the whole book is building up to that. That is the climax of the book. That is like the whole tension of the book is what is this shadow's name? And I was like, you're a moron if you do not even guess that it is his own name. And I was so pissed off that the author did that because it's like, hey, if that's the first thing I think of, how can that be like your major twist at the end is the most predictable thing in the entire world is just to say your own name. So it just pissed me off because it's like, how can the author go with that? I mean, why can't you try to subvert expectations? I mean, like, Ged to finally like say his own name and it doesn't do anything. Like, nope, that's not his name. You were wrong. If you were thinking that was the obvious answer, nope, that wasn't it. But it was it. So all he had to do was just say his own name and boom, the shadow is dead. It's defeated. It's done. He could have done that from the very first moment. And I was so pissed off because I knew it. I knew like, say your name, dude. Say your name. Why not? You got nothing else to lose. You got nothing else to try. It's a shadow. Say your name. He doesn't though. And that's the final like twist of the book is the shadow was named Ged. It's his own name. God, I hated that. So when I was reading this book and it was building up to that, I told myself, if he has to say his own name, I am giving this book 4 stars. Because like I said, when there was the line about only light can defeat shadow or whatever, I was like, okay, that's it. It's 5 stars. This book is not getting anything less. That seals the deal. It's a 5-star book. But I began thinking, if he says his name at the end, I swear to God, I'm giving this book 4 stars. And then he said his own name and the shadow died. And so I was just, oh God, I hated it so much. It's so predictable. A moron would have known this. Okay, so if you skipped over the last part, I talked about heavy spoilers. So basically something happens toward the end of the book where I decided I'm going to knock the book a star because of something that happens. And again, that's a major spoiler if you skipped over that. So I began thinking, you know, after finishing this book, you know, because of that problem I had with the end of the book, you know, okay, am I really going to dock the book a star for that? Or am I going to go ahead and give the book 5 stars? Because when I finished this book, I was still thinking, you know, this is one of the better fantasy books I've read. But because of that thing that happened at the end, I was just like, okay, oh, I hated that so much. So, do I really give it 4 stars? But then I began to think more and more about the book. And I thought, what about the other characters? Just all the other characters. So there's the mentor wizard guy in the start of the book, and there's also like the lady who is almost like Ged's mother figure in the very start of the book. I forget she was even a character. She never appeared in the rest of the book. There's like his best friend. We don't really get anything about him. There's his antagonist, his rival. We don't meet him anywhere else in the book. There's the headmaster. He only appears for like 2 paragraphs. There's a second headmaster who only appears for like 2 paragraphs as well. He never appears in the rest of the book. There's that princess girl on the island. She never appears elsewhere in the book. We don't get anything really from the school. We don't get to attend any classes or whatever with Ged. We don't really get to meet any of his teachers. So the more I thought about it, I just realized how empty this world is. So in terms of like the characterization, it has nothing when it comes to like George R. R. Martin and Game of Thrones, where it's just like hundreds of characters and it's all really intricate in the history all of the characters have, and like one lever moves another. So if this person does this, it affects these other characters. With this book, it's just like you have a name here and a name there and a name there and a name there, and you don't really learn anything about those names, those people. There's all these islands, but you don't really learn anything about these islands. It's just such an empty world. And then like Harry Potter, so there's all the classmates Harry has, and all the different school, or the Ravenclaw and Gryffindor and all that. And there's the headmaster, and there's all the teachers, and there's all the different classes. And you go to school with Harry and you see him learning things and struggling with things and everything. There is none of that really in this book. It's just kind of skipped right over, where in just one paragraph, like an entire year will pass by. So there's none of the kind of like wizard school of Harry Potter. And then in terms of like Lord of the Rings, where J.R.R. Tolkien will have like thousands of years of history, and behind all of every single territory or whatever, every land will have like a whole history behind it. There is none of that. You basically go to an island, and basically all they do there is maybe there's like one fisherman there or one trader there, and that's the only person Ged talks to, and then he moves on, and that's the only thing you ever know about the island. So there's really none of the world building whatsoever of Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter or a Game of Thrones. The world building in this book is incredibly flat. The characters in the book are, for the most part, incredibly flat, except I do want to express that the characterization of Ged being like having the vice of his pride and then making a mistake, and then he has the character growth, and he still makes mistakes, but at least he's doing it for the right reasons now. And then he has the part with the dragons, which was just a badass moment, and then the line about the light and the shadow thing. So I really liked that, but in nowhere else in the book was there any good characterization, really. So there's just not good characterization in this book. There's not good world building in the book. I do like that it has a dark-skinned cast, because that's just so different for fantasy books. And I think the book was written in the 1960s or 1970s, so it's not like just a modern book with the dark-skinned cast. This was written in like the 60s or 70s, and even then she had dark-skinned cast. That is cool. I like that. That's real progressive of her, basically. So I do want to commend her for that. I think that is a good thing. I want more fantasy books to have more diverse casts and, use different cultures more. Please, yes, do that. That is a very good thing. I am very concerned about the line where the other islands, where it was those islands are populated by barbaric, light-skinned people. I think I will be interested to read the next book. I think it's called The Tombs of Aten or something like that. I want to try picking it up from the library if I can. Because I'm really intrigued to see how she presents it. Is if Ged thinks like, oh, those people are barbaric, but if he actually goes there, does he realize like, oh, these people aren't barbaric at all. They're kind of just like me, you know, we have more in common than we have apart, you know, they have this own culture of theirs that I never knew existed, you know, and I can learn to appreciate that. Is that the way the author is going to go? Where learning about the other cultures, basically you learn you were wrong about thinking, oh, those people from the other distant land, we think they're barbarians, but I was wrong. They're actually a real civilized, cultured people, you know? That's the way I think you should present things, because that shows that the thinking the other people, the strangers or whatever, are barbarians, that was a wrong opinion, that was a prejudiced opinion or whatever, that you had the wrong stereotype or whatever, that you were wrong. That is a good message, you know, that is the message we should be sending. But instead, if she wants to take the other route where, oh, the white people are the barbarians, you know, they're bad people, because she wants to flip it around where usually in stories the white people would be the good ones and the blacks are, you know, the savages or whatever, you know, or the Native Americans are the savages, you know. If that's the way she's going to go with it, where the white people are the barbaric savages or whatever, if she does that, that's probably going to knock it down to an immediate 1-star rating. But if she does the thing where she actually flips it around, where Ged discovers like, oh, I was actually wrong about these people. I just didn't know them very well. And I just thought out of my own prejudice or whatever, my own ignorance, that these were barbaric people. And I was wrong. That would be a good message. Just like how she had the message about only light can defeat shadow, you know, that is a great message. So I am really intrigued to see how she presents it. If she has a good message about it, where he was wrong about thinking they're barbarians, or whether he was right and they're just barbaric evil people and white people are bad. That is a bad message. Just like thinking that Africans are a barbaric people, or that, you know, the Native Americans are just evil people or whatever, you know, both are wrong. So I'm curious to see which way she takes for that. So I know I'm kind of wandering back and forth here between the rating. So on the good side, I like about the cast being dark skinned. That was real good. I liked the character growth, going from real pride to having his character growth moment where he makes a real bad mistake. And I really like how he basically tries to fix his mistake, you know, and he tries to take accountability for it, you know, and he faces his adversity. He faces the dragons, and, you know, he rejects this powerful stone because he senses that it's evil, even though he has a character trait or whatever where he wanted to be real powerful. That was his vice. He rejects it, and he says only light can defeat shadow. Great. Yes, that is a great message. I love that. I also like the part where there was a dying boy and he decided to use magic, even though he knew he should not. It was a mistake. He did it anyway because of the right reasons, you know. That was a good character decision because it contrasted with him using magic for the wrong reasons. So I liked all of that. The writing I thought was, you know, like I say, is just passable. I don't think it was especially good or bad. The characterization I thought for Ged was okay for the most part, you know, with all the character growth stuff. I liked all of that. But all the other characters were very flat and just almost non-existent. The world building was really flat for the most part. I like that the magic system seemed pretty unique and tailored to the world. So it's this world with all these islands. So they use the magic to do very specific things that would be very useful, like building boats or building sails or pushing wind into the sails or protecting the boats from the water or whatever, or also controlling the weather and stuff. And they can also do some stuff with transforming into animals or different whatever. And that's why I like the cover. It's bird of some kind, a hawk or whatever. And so the character can kind of become the animals. And something I like about that is there's also a cost to it. So you can't just become an animal and, do whatever you want all the time. There is a danger behind turning into an animal, basically, a very real danger. And I like that because that puts limitations on magic, because it's also a question of, if you can turn into a bird, why not just fly to another island? Why not, why do all this stuff about building a sail and, all of that when you could just turn into a bird and fly? Because there's a reason why you should not turn into the bird, and because, there's some dangerous uses behind magic, and I really like that. And you see in the book how using the magic, it's mentioned in the book how there's like an equilibrium. So if you do magic in one case, in one place, you may be distorting something in another place. So because of it, magic is pretty dangerous to wield, and you have to know what you're doing. And I like all of that. That is good world building or whatever from that aspect. So, when I read the line about only light can defeat shadow, I thought, okay, this is going to be a 5-star book. That settles it. Then I got to a part toward the end that I mentioned with the shadow, where I thought, if the book ends this way, I'm going to dock it a star. And it did. So I kind of decided, I'm going to have to stick to my guns and dock it a star for that, because it bothered me so much. Then as I was thinking more and more about the book over the last couple days, I had more problems with it. So a problem I had with Tolkien is so much of the book, The Fellowship of the Ring, is just boring, because it's about these characters just walking through the forest or whatever, and that's all they do all day, is they just walk, 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 and it's just describing all the scenery, and it's just boring. Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring is just a pretty boring story, honestly. And so the first half of the book, I thought the book was more entertaining. It was more fast-paced, things were flying by. Like all of the schooling flies by real soon. But then in the latter half of the book, pretty much the whole latter half of the book is just Ged will try to go from one island to another, and then he'll try to barter passage on a boat, and he may do some magic to put some wind in the sails or whatever, or to patch up the boat or whatever, and to sail to another island, and nothing really happens on the island in terms of world building, where you don't really get to know a lot of the world. And then from that island he has to get on another boat and the same thing, and go to another island, and then get in another boat and go to another island, and then sail his boat across a sea, and then he runs into some rocks, and so he has to repair his boat, and then he repairs his boat and he sails to another island, and then another island, and then another island, and then he meets his old friend from school, so they get on a boat and they go to another island, and then they pursue the shadow across the water in a boat. And so it's just the whole second half of the book is just the same thing, page after page, just in a boat going from one place to another, and just patching up the boat and just putting wind in the sail or whatever. So even though the first half of the book had it felt like so much was going on, all these dragons and stuff, and it's just oh man, this is crazy, 8 or 9 dragons at a time, holy crap. But then the whole second half of the book is just about repatching sails and patching holes in the boat and just sailing across the water. That's the entire book. And it's basically the problem I had with Tolkien and Fellowship of the Ring. It's just boring. It's the same thing, page after page after page after page, and it's not really adding anything. It's just the same thing. It's, put wind in the sail, cast a spell on the boat. It's not using the magic in any kind of new way. It's just repetitive. So because of that, I kind of realized the second half of the book was just pretty boring. Nothing was really happening. It wasn't expanding the world in any way. You weren't really meeting any new characters, really, who were expanding the character depth or whatever. So ultimately, even though the writing in the book was pretty passable, the characterization and the world building was, for the most part, very thin. So because of that, ultimately I have to dock the book another star. So I really hate doing this, but I think I have to give the book 3 stars. And it's so unfortunate to say that because I really thought this could have been like a 5-star masterpiece. Like I was going to in fact think like, you know, this book is more enjoyable than Lord of the Rings or whatever. But the more I thought about it, I just realized like, no, that is an insult. This is not better than Lord of the Rings. I like that it has a dark skinned cast or whatever, but that alone does not make it better than Tolkien. Tolkien is basically a genius. He was a master of language and mythology and history, and he had so much crammed into his book. Like I say, he had thousands of years of lore that he would have for his worlds. And, you know, I don't think he does it very well in Fellowship of the Ring. I think he probably does it a little bit better maybe in like the Silmarillion or whatever, where he has more world building, where he tells you more about the history of this world. You don't really get that a whole ton in Fellowship of the Ring. But still, Tolkien's world building is leagues better than this. I mean, Tolkien has thousands of years of history in his world. George R. R. Martin has a cast of characters this long, you know? And who's the other one? Harry Potter. J.K. Rowling has, you know, all these classes and all these classmates and all the different, you know, Ravenclaw and Gryffindor and all of these things. And there's Quidditch and everything. And there's so much more in the school. And like Dumbledore, he's such a prominent guy. Whereas in this book, the headmaster, I forget his name. He's only in the book for like a paragraph. The Senka headmaster is only in the book for a paragraph. All of the friends, like all the other characters, they only have like a page or two that they really appear in the book. So there's just really no good world building or no good characterization in the book, really, beyond what I mentioned with Ged and his, you know, his pride and all of that. That I think was well done. The rest of the book, for the most part, really bland, empty world. So no, this is not anywhere close to George R. R. Martin or J.K. Rowling or J.R. Tolkien. It does not deserve to be spoken in the same breath. It is not better than Lord of the Rings. It's not better than Game of Thrones. It's not better than Harry Potter. But it is still worth reading. So it is still a recommended read territory, 3 stars, and it's kind of a bright 3 stars. So like I say, I was tempted to give it 5 stars. Then I kind of had to give it 4 because of something that happens in the end. And the more I thought about it, the less I was really impressed with the book. So ultimately it gets 3 stars, but still a recommended read. I would recommend picking it up from the library if you can. Or otherwise, I would still say yes, probably go ahead and try to buy a copy if you can't find it from a library or whatever. I think it's definitely worth reading. And even though like yesterday or so, I was kind of thinking, you know, I'm not really too interested in the second book because I was so unhappy with how this book ended. I was just like, the ending ruined the book. But the more I think about it, I really want to figure out how she presents this other land with these light-skinned people who may be barbarians, you know? I want to see if she presents them well, where the character was wrong about their prejudice notions or whatever, where it is actually a developed culture or whatever, or if instead it is just a barbaric, savage people. That is going to determine whether the series really gets an instant 1 star and just, nope, the series is dead to me, or if I might in fact continue the series. And my main problem with this book kind of is the world building, just the empty world building. So it's a question of, will the second book have better world building than this one? You know, so it's going to be a chance for the second book to redeem itself. So this book has a decent enough start. There's some good things and some flaws, some major flaws, and there's also some major concerns going forward. So I do think I'm going to go to the library probably fairly soon because I am pretty intrigued to try the second book and just see how it goes. And also I'm intrigued to see how she does with the character, because as it is, the character is pretty powerful. So I'm curious to see what kind of challenge she may have for the character, and also what she might do with his character in terms of like character growth. So is he pretty much as developed as he will ever be, or does he still have more room to grow, and how? So I think I will try the second book fairly soon. So that is about it for Earthsea, A Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin. I am still glad I got the signed book by her. I think that's real cool. I know she's a very prominent author and all that. So anyway, that is it for Wizard of Earthsea. Thank you guys for watching. Bye.
2, 3, 4.